Dreadful media twats, dreadful media twats, dreadful, dreadful, dreadful twats, terrible, dreadful media twats, dreadful, 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 dreadful twats. So it's dreadful, 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 dreadful media twats. Dreadful media twats, dreadful media twats, dreadful, dreadful media twats.
The year is 2025. Britain has been in a remorseless industrial decline for over 130 years. In fact, there is nowhere in the world that has declined further industrially speaking. But, of course, Britain remains an imperial power, which you will know if you have been an observant viewer and listener of the Decline and Fall show. And there are still some industries in which good old Albion still leads the world. I know Americans contest this fact, but we will get back to that later. And one of those industries is, of course, the industry producing media twats. It is perhaps the most refined export of Britain, other than terrible romantic comedies, the career of James Corden, and the continued existence of Piers Morgan. But they all probably come under the banner of media twats. Now, what does it take to create a media twat? You need a very specific and weird private school system, which, of course, this being Britain, this is referred to as the public school system. I know Americans get confused about that, but do bear with us. You need a system of universities which is interlinked to the upper echelons of the intelligence services, which people are recruited through. Just read Le Carre's books if you want a brief introduction to any of this. You need the British class system, which is a tremendously segmented class system, which is not just, of course, the good old traditional bourgeois, petty bourgeois, and bourgeois. It is segmented even within the segment. I loathe and detest the former spook and police agent and colonial cop George Orwell, but he did write something wise about this once when he said that he was from the lower middle class, which makes actually a good degree of sense when you consider the background of our media twats, because by combining all of these elements together, and again together with a rabid Western chauvinism, often, shall we say, bizarre sexual proclivities, and a fanatical loyalty to the Crown, the City of London, and their own stock portfolios, you will get a unique combination which produces a media twat. Now, we are going to be fair in this episode. There will be media twats from the right and media twats from the left. And by the time we reach our conclusion, we hope to have demonstrated just how comprehensive the dictatorship really is in Britain. Now, Kit, as a member of the outsider media, can you talk about your experiences encountering some of the media twats that we've got on the list for today, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There are several said twats who I've had direct personal dealings with in the flesh in certain instances. And yes, they are bonded by a united total lack of anything approaching ethics, basic decency, and they view people like myself with total surging visceral contempt, because a not insignificant part of my work is calling out propaganda and propagandists, which, mainstream media, quote unquote, journalists are without exception these days, pretty much. They don't like being taken to task about the fact that they are craven stenographers for state power. And they I think that another source of contempt is that, I didn't go to an elite university and I didn't attend Eton or any of this kind of toxic constellation of public schools or boarding schools, which is where they all met each other. I believe it was Lloyd George, that well-known admirer of Hitler, who said that Oxford was that sunny period between Eton and Parliament. Staying on the Hitler theme, the Nazis viewed British boarding schools with their focus on abuse of children in every way conceivable, as character building, wanted to emulate them, to grow to grow a better class of German imperialist. And this is the kind of milieu these people emerge from. And yes, it's a giant chumocracy where they all somehow know each other or have crossed paths. They all go and get pissed together. They often with, senior government officials or military or intelligence apparatchiks. And they feel very smug about that. And they also, as well, I think a recurring theme of this show will be people who have histories of the worst takes imaginable, and this not harming their careers at all. In fact, they usually get raises and promotions. But also a recurring theme of this show is how often people are rewarded for whether they are on the ostensible left or the right, how people's careers in mainstream journalism are often contingent on them lashing out at genuine leftists and enforcing the status quo, while pretending to be radical. So yeah, let's dive in, and I think that first off we have the infamous Hamish De Bretton-Gordon. Now, he is a British Army veteran who fronts as a chemical and biological warfare expert. And he was very prominent in the Syrian dirty war, was constantly making completely unscientific and bogus claims about supposed chemical weapons attacks carried out by Syrian government forces. He was also employed by MI6 to collect soil samples from Syria to prove that the government had carried out chemical weapons attacks against its people in order to trigger US intervention. And this was openly stated in I believe it was a Daily Mirror report at the time, it was early 2014, where a nameless British intelligence official was quoted as saying, well, the reason we did these tests was because America wants more evidence of Assad crossing the red line of chemical weapons use before intervention. If they don't intervene, there was no point in us doing the tests. And it's very, very clear that these supposed chemical weapons attacks in Syria were staged by the opposition with the assistance of people like Hamish De Bretton-Gordon and White Helmet's founder, now dead, we'll get into him in due course, James Mesurier. And it really rather grotesquely and chillingly, in several cases, it's clear that staging these attacks necessitated carrying out a massacre of innocent people with chemical weapons to make it look like they were victims of a government strike, when actually it was all just staged for mass media consumption and the manufacturing of consent for outright military intervention, up to and including boots on the ground in Syria. They didn't get their man for over 10 years, but now finally MI6 has installed HTS as running Syria, and Hamish has been all over the media saying, well, these guys are the real deal, they're the legitimate rulers of Syria, we need to assist them, and has also advocated for the White Helmets, British intelligence construct, being the country's new emergency services and medical service. So, he has quite the track record of bad takes, including suggesting that Russia had developed Novichok hand grenades, which of course had not this would be pretty much scientifically impossible to do. But B, as well, we've not seen any evidence of this or chemical weapons used by Russia during the proxy war in Ukraine. We have seen Ukraine use chemical weapons, drop cylinders from drones on soldiers, etc., and then they die horrible deaths due to the chemicals involved. But this is just his claims of Novichok hand grenades pale in comparison to his commentary on the Ukraine war, as I think we've dug up some rather extraordinary examples of his talent for the worst possible takes imaginable. Why didn't you delve in, Alex?
Well, Hamish is, of course, a man who likes a good story. The story usually being one of British contracted out to Ukraine, obviously, daring do, taking down the ghastly Russian behemoth. He's had several absolute crackers over the years of the special military operation, including this one from 2024, that where he claimed that the Russian nuclear arsenal was defunct, and this could be taken out by Ukraine in its bold new move of striking Russian military facilities deep inside Russia itself. So that was that was one particular cracker from Hamish. But the one thing Hamish loves more than, of course, promoting wars and more than, of course, indulging in military fantasies, is the fantasy about British military capabilities. And, of course, he loves to talk about the fact that he's a former tank commander. And here he is he's in 2023. This is, by the way, this is in the middle of just the beginning of the ill-fated Ukrainian but NATO-organized counteroffensive in the Zaporozhye region. And Hamish went into print in the Daily Telegraph, or maybe, I don't know, at this stage, there's an AI of Hamish De Bretton-Gordon who just pumps these things out for him. But he says here, as a former tank commander, I know the Challenger 2 vastly outmatches what's left of Russia's armor. I imagine that that's how all of these people speak, but maybe more drunk. But he was leading the charge here in a series of hysterical articles in mid-2023 about the, correct me if I'm wrong, Kip, but I think it was around about a dozen or so Challenger 2 tanks that were provided for the usage of the Ukrainians, maybe less than that, out of Britain's diminished tank fleet of around about 50-odd. So now I think there's only around about 30-odd functional Challenger 2 tanks the British actually have. Maybe more on that in future episodes. But everybody, and De Bretton-Gordon was the lead figure in this, was claiming that the Challenger 2 was vastly superior to anything that those backward orcs had. There was all the mere appearance of this tank would be all that was needed to sweep aside Putin's conscripts. Now, put a pin in that one, Putin's conscripts, because, of course, the Russians have conducted like a wave of mobilization. That's true. The Russians do have conscripts serving in their forces, but mostly their ranks now are made up from volunteers recruited to the army for a combination of patriotic reasons, and also, of course, there are monetary advantages to serving in the Russian armed forces these days. Now, the ones who have an almost entirely conscripted army are the Ukrainians. You can see the videos of it online. The guys jumping out of vans and bundling Deliveroo drivers into the back of a recruitment van, beating the shit out of them, and then hurling them onto the front line, where they are forced to stand and fight against the Russians to the last man, because there's a group of apparently usually Polish, British, or American blocking battalions behind them who shoot them if they try and retreat or surrender. So De Bretton-Gordon, a liar, but also a delusional lunatic, because after the Russians took out one of his cherished Challenger 2 tanks, he then claimed in another article, this time for The Sun, that this was just a damn fluke. I am an ex-Brit tank commander. The Russians got lucky by destroying a Challenger 2, and it won't change the war. Of course, it didn't change the war. It just continued the way the war was going, which is that Zaporozhye counteroffensive saw the battlefield turned into an absolute elephant's graveyard of armored vehicles, mostly provided by the Germans, some by the Americans, some by the British. But with regard to the Challenger 2, of course, as soon as one of them was destroyed, the British MOD told the Ukrainians to stop using them, because they didn't want the fact that the Russians could destroy them to be widely known, because that might affect future sales. So, as with everything else about Britain, really, it's all about the bottom line. And the delusional madness that De Bretton-Gordon engaged in those articles about the inevitability of the glorious British armored columns crushing the Russian orcs, I don't think it's just the fact that he's a liar, even though he is. I think he's mad enough to actually believe this stuff. Because, again, let's go back to the definition of a media twat. The definition of a media twat is somebody who is not just a paid propagandist, but they have to believe on some level in the sort of civilizational, supremacist, pro-Western narrative. And particularly for like someone like our friend Hamish here, and he's the guy we're covering next, which is good old Dickie Kemp. These guys are like British military officers, and to be a British military officer, you need to have the unique combination of an unlimited belief in yourself, the glories of good old Albion, but also have the intelligence of a concussed gnat. Which means you have no ability to do critical analysis whatsoever. In fact, it's dangerous for your job as either an army officer, a spy, or a journalist, or all three in the case of these guys. You don't actually want to have any critical self-analysis or reflection on your mistakes because you have to believe 100% in the narrative that you're putting out there. So for De Bretton-Gordon, it's absolutely necessary to still believe that the Russians are fighting with reconditioned T-34 tanks and can't possibly compete with anything that the Brits have to offer. Reality, of course, keeps proving him wrong, but then again, Hamish still keeps getting those contracts from all the media, so who's winning in this case? Kit, did you have anything to add to the oeuvre of our first candidate for media twat?
Well, number one, I think the detail of that piece on how British-made tanks are about to sweep Putin's conscripts aside. This was a meme that the media was wanted to seize on. That Russia has conscripts, which means that they're dragging people off the streets who have no morale and don't want to fight, and versus the Ukrainians who are doggedly and heroically defending their homeland completely voluntarily. And yes, as you mentioned, we can see with our own eyes the endless, rather horrific videos of young men being dragged off the streets by conscription vans. Although, I mean, to the extent that even people who are missing limbs from previous frontline experience are being conscripted again. I mean, it's just really quite extraordinary. But the in this doggerel, Hamish says Russian recruits appear to be given a few days of training, a little ammunition, and then thrown into the meat grinder with a life expectancy surely measured in days. They might as well be gunning them down on the training fields. It will be faster, cheaper, and about as combat effective. And he also states, the Ukrainians have morale in spades. The Russian conscripts have virtually none. With Ukrainian canniness, Western intelligence and equipment, and a smattering of good fortune, I expect what's left of the Russian army to be nothing more than a speed bump on the way to liberating Crimea, pushing to the Russian border, and chucking Putin's war criminals out of Ukraine once and for all. We see the reality was that Ukraine lost up to 100,000 people one way or another, regaining 0.25% of the territory they'd lost in the initial phases of the special military operation. And yes, it was a total disaster, which a large number of pundits had made very bold pronouncements about, and Applebaum said the future of Western civilization hung on Ukraine's success in the counteroffensive. It must also be stressed as well that we now know from the Times of London that the Ukrainians were telling their puppet masters in Washington and London, we're not ready for this. The Russians have built extensive defenses. We don't want to go now. And the British just encouraged them to go ahead anyway, and said, well, bearing in mind that the units that you're fielding for this operation are bigger than our entire army. You'll easily be able to beat the Russians. They're not very strong. And then it was a total and complete disaster, to the extent that Pentagon chiefs now can take the view that no counteroffensive happened at all. I might add as well that the Brett Gordon ends ends on a very optimistic note that the counteroffensive is going to be the beginning of the end of Putin, which again we see how that's worked out. But in terms of sheer stupidity, I do think that a year later, almost to the day, De Bretton-Gordon wrote another op-ed, which you had up on screen before we got into that section, about how Putin's nuclear arsenal is crumbling and how Ukraine can take it out for good. Now, he makes this there's an absolutely astonishing segment in this completely ludicrous and quite frankly Dr. Strangelove tier insane piece, because Russia does have the biggest nuclear arsenal in the world, and it is far from crumbling. He argues, De Bretton-Gordon, that Russia has recently carried out a series of nuclear drills, and they've used dummy warheads because the real ones are likely, emphasis added, bust. Now, the military veteran doesn't seem to understand that there is a difference between a nuclear drill and a nuclear test. So in a nuclear test, you would use real nukes. In a nuclear drill, you wouldn't. But he bases the fact that the Russia didn't use actual nukes during this drill as proof that they don't actually have a nuclear arsenal, and there's no risk of nuclear war. Like, these people are insane. And if you look at polls, what's really interesting is, of course, the average readership of the Daily Telegraph is probably people in their 60s and 70s, with the odd Sebastian Payne style PPE graduate thrown into the mix. We'll get into Mr. Payne in due course, an at surname. If you look at polls of British citizens, it is overwhelmingly older generations who view Russia as a threat and view Ukraine as a core interest of Britain. Younger generations don't care. They don't care, and it's because of people like De Bretton-Gordon with this kind of ravenous mania for war with Russia, and relentlessly telling audiences that Russia's weak, Russia's pathetic, Russia's a joke, its military is not worthy of the name. We can really win this, and the real world effect is that hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are dead. And what's more is that this kind of output is probably read by people in Downing Street and the Ministry of Defence, and they probably attach credibility to it. I might at the Grey Zone in June 2022, we reported on a bunch of leaked emails from this shadowy cabal of ex-military and intelligence people and historians and academics who were sharing mainstream media articles about how Russian soldiers had never seen a toilet before in the initial stages of the special military operation, and they thought this was true. Like they were like they really believed this, and it's just like, and these people have influence and power within Whitehall. It's terrifying.
Well, there's a funny thing, and we've discussed this before, which is that I would say that the media twats and the political twats feed off each other. So, like the likes of Keir Starmer probably thinks that Hamish De Bretton-Gordon is he seems like he knows what he's talking about, and so they sort of they create a self-reinforcing circle of like mediocrity and stupidity. But there are those beyond them who actually have serious responsibilities, who do know the actual condition of the Russian nuclear arsenal, have a rough idea of it, who do know the real capabilities of the Russian army. Because when you actually dig down into like Defense Select Committee reports and testimony of generals, you find like odd lines like, "Oh yeah, the British army get wiped out in 3 days, if actually deployed." This is never publicized. You only find this if you know where to go and look for it. So, like, when you think about what, if you've done, like, I don't know, like some sort of sociology class at school or A-level or something like that, and you're asked, well, what is the function of the media? It's to inform society. Well, it quite plainly does not, because the actual information about the Ukraine war is all out there. It's not hidden. It's in government. You could get the truth from the Ukraine war actually from mainly, but not exclusively, the British government's own sources, and even from like reports on this tucked away in the inside of a buried inside a website, the mainstream news website sometimes. Never highlighted though. The likes of Hamish get highlighted, and the likes of the next man in our cavalcade of twattery, the likes of course, Colonel Richard Kemp. Now, the reason why these people, of course, have a career is because their job is to lie to you. And it's also to lie to the idiots in power who believe them. Now, Richard Kemp, of course, is a sort of kindred spirit to our friend Hamish in that he's a former British Army officer, again, long gone belligerent, short on brains, who essentially acts as a ludicrous stenographer for whatever it is that the Ministry of Defence in London is putting out at any given moment in time, or British allies around the world are putting out at any moment in time. Now, Kemp, I find easily as disgusting as Hamish in that he went to Gaza with the Israelis and did this ludicrous like propaganda video on the border there, proclaiming that there was no genocide, Israel is the most ethical army in the world, etc. But he also indulges in the same military fantasies as De Bretton-Gordon. And when he claimed in this article that Hamas terror are being smashed in Gaza City. Now, if you look at like what happened after the Trump's alleged ceasefire, where the resistance forces emerged from the tunnels, or some of them did, to take control of the streets again, you will see not a force that was smashed, but a force that had actually grown in, to use the old horrible HR term, skills, knowledge, and experience over the previous couple of years. And a force that every time they actually fought the Israelis man to man, won. They won. Because then that was not something that was only reported on like electronic intifada. That was something that was being reported in the Israeli press, even by former Israeli army officers, about the crap nature of the Israeli soldiery and the fact that man for man, the Hamas forces and the other associated resistance forces were better. So Kemp, of course, just repeats whatever the hell it is that he's told to in this usual belligerent, arrogant, posh twat style. He's another one who, of course, has like a series of absurd fantasies about the war in Ukraine, which you chronicled in a Twitter thread a while back, Kit, where at 1 minute our friend Richard says one thing, another minute he says another. Again, depends entirely upon what the take. And Richard is, of course, unashamed in all of this, because I think his readers mostly have memories clouded with so much port and cheese that through frequent attacks of gout, that they don't actually have a memory that stretches back longer than the last 8 seconds, do they?
No, well, I mean, on that subject, if you just scroll down to the next post in this thread, this one, and enlarge it possibly. The Putin cannot survive another year like 2024. This was published in January 2025. The next month, Richard Kemp writes, Ukraine fought hard, but there is now no chance of them taking their country back. And he has a consistent track record of doing this. And throughout 2023, he was saying Russia is facing total collapse economically, politically, militarily, week in, week out. Well, I mean, with the, more than occasional post October 7th reference to, how the saintly Israelis are crushing the evil terrorists in Gaza when actually they were getting gassed by a bunch of teenagers in knockoff Adidas with homemade weapons when they actually dared to step into Gaza. And then at the end of the year, he said, yeah, Ukraine is losing, but the UK must stand by it. He was a rabid tub thumper and cheer. If you go to go back to the very first post, he was a rabid cheerleader and tub thumper for the British planned and equipped Kursk offensive or counter-offensive. Ukraine has just humiliated Putin. Kiev's forces have advanced into Russian territory. This may mark a turn in the West's fortunes in the struggle against the Kremlin's despot. And then he fast forward a few months. The Kursk offensive may prove to have been Ukraine's most costly mistake. And it's just like, there are so many examples of him doing this, and it's like, yeah, that it's interesting. It's unsurprising that he is offering all of these spectacularly bad takes on Ukraine. But this is a guy who has he is a hardcore Zionist who is tied to a large number of Israeli lobbying operations in Britain, and has a history of making absolutely repulsive statements about Muslims and all sorts. And then this has not harmed his career at all. He's like, this is something we'll get into in greater detail, in due course. But he's just someone who he seems impossible to get rid of. There is no take so bad, there is no contradiction so utterly brazen that harms his career. And again, this is the Daily Telegraph. I might add that there are a number of people on its staff who are, who are contributors at least, who are, ex-military, ex-intelligence, maybe ex in inverted commas, ex, diplomats or diplomatic corps operatives, and even they in recent months have after at one stage their the editor, I forget his name, Dominic, one of their editors who's part of NAFO, that kind of online pro-Ukraine troll operation. He released a video where he said that Ukraine can win this war purely via propaganda, and if I was a Russian conscript in a trench in Donbass waiting for Ukraine's counter-offensive to wash over me, Budanov's tweets would terrify me. And it's just like, even they recently are now admitting that Ukraine can't win this. Zelensky's absolutely delusional for not suing for peace, and it's all been a total disaster. And there is such is the way of these things. As I mentioned in the introduction, journalists don't like being called out, and their mainstream journalists, and I use that term very loosely, do not like being called out on their bullshit. And it is a recurrent theme with so often that they will end up rubbishing positions that they themselves were espousing mere months ago. Alistair Heath, who's the Daily Telegraph's economics editor, was hailing the Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng fever dream budget in late 2022 as the most beautiful budget he'd ever seen in history. And then, when this resulted in total disaster, his response wasn't quite, I told you this would happen, but it was borderline. It was borderline like this was foolhardy and silly. And it's like, you were this massive advocate for this. Zero accountability. Zero.
Yes, and as long as you continue to obey orders, there will never be any accountability for a media twat. Now, talking of obeying orders, a military background is useful for media twat, but also it is hinges upon the right kind of schooling, the right kind of career path, the right kind of connections. And our next media twat, in fact, it's a pair of media twats, one of which we'll take first, as he has a very prominent role in recent controversies. And that is, of course, the certain Mr. Mark Urban. Now, Mark Urban, if you're, because I was a nerd in my early 20s, a regular watcher of Newsnight, was the Newsnight diplomatic editor for a very, very long time. And he was frequently on there giving his, I now know, exorably propagandistic takes to a nodding Jeremy Paxman who would only periodically pull, in the words of Malcolm Tucker, his big rubbery horse face of mock incredulity at it. Now, Mark Urban is a fascinating character due to his, shall we say, interesting career history and direct connection to various different incidents, including, of course, the Skripal incident of a few years ago, which was as you yourself have reported on, Kit, and as the Russia expert, genuine expert, John Helmer has reported, this was very much a very shady British intelligence operation, the precise nature of which is still unclear as to what was done to who and when. But can you fill us in on the role of Mark Urban and why you have included him in this media twat hall of honor?
Well, okay. So Mark Urban is a very interesting character. That's not a reflection of the quality of his quote unquote journalism, but if on his Wikipedia page, I see has been heavily pruned recently to basically strip out any reference to his personal or professional background before joining the BBC in 1983. He resigned in 2024, so that's like 4 decades of working at the highest echelons of the British state broadcaster, which he joined immediately upon leaving university, except not immediately. Because and this isn't stated in his official wiki entries, and this is actually quite difficult to find using Google now for reasons we can only guess at, is he was a student at King's College. Now, King's College enjoys a very close relationship with the British military and the British security and intelligence services. Its War Department has armed guards, and I know this because I attended a guest lecture there. You get a very thorough search and have to empty your pockets, etc. when you enter this when you enter this department. There is a enormous number of people who end up alumni of King's College who end up working for the security and intelligence services, who end up working for the military, who end up within the NATO Brain Trust, etc. So what's kind of fascinating is that after leaving university, he served in the Royal Tank Regiment, which is like this elite British Army unit, and he did so under a fast track program to get promising potential future military operatives and soldiers in at a high level from an effectively quite without the kind of standard multi-year training that usually accompanies being elevated to that position. Now, he supposedly left the Royal Tank Regiment and severed all ties with full personal ties with the army, and then after just a year, and then joined the BBC. Now, he in that tank regiment was an individual called Pablo Miller, who is a veteran MI6 officer, who's been accused of all sorts of shady dealings, including serving as the handler and recruiter of Sergei Skripal, who, in a crazy coincidence, Mark Urban spent the year before Skripal's alleged poisoning in Salisbury in March 2018 interviewing at his Salisbury home. Miller, I might add, is also Sergei Skripal's neighbour in Salisbury. However, in late 2018, Urban released a book called The Skripal Files, which supposedly told the true story of of his poisoning and Skripal's intelligence background, etc. It has been subject to numerous revisions because its contents contradict the official narrative, and so they have to be changed because, like, otherwise that's a bit awkward. It's a spectacularly bad book, and it, as with most of his all of his journalistic output and the many books that he's written, it's based on powerful people telling him things, often anonymously, which he writes down without question. Now, I actually confronted Mark Urban at a book launch in central London in late 2018. This was on the Skripal files, and I asked him whether he thought that the 2 British government D notices issued in the aftermath of Skripal's apparent poisoning had anything to do with why the media didn't explore Skripal's relationship with Pablo Miller, and indeed the fact that Miller worked for Christopher Steele's Orbit Intelligence. And he spoke to me with absolutely seething contempt, looking at me like I was something unpleasant on the underside of his shoe, and basically just called me an idiot and suggested that I don't understand how D notices work, and that if journalists had found anything worth reporting on, they would have reported on it anyway, despite these D notices. We will be doing a special on the D notice system in due course. I've just written a piece for the Grey Zone based on declassified files that show that the DSMA committee boasts about having a 90% success rate in getting journalists to not write about things that the British government doesn't want in the public domain. So there's that aspect to it. But I think that he was a made man from a very early age. I mean, can you imagine working for the BBC 40 years? That's an extraordinary amount of time, and to have allegedly done nothing else, and along the way engaged in a lot of embedded journalism, during the first Gulf War and the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, and then in the Balkan Wars of the 90s, he was an embedded BBC reporter, and obviously was on very chummy terms with the military and intelligence apparatchiks who were ensuring his safety, and was obviously not writing things they didn't or publicizing things they didn't want him to. And basically serving as a public relations unit for the British military, often in totally illegal wars of aggression. So yeah, I mean, that not only didn't harm his career, it probably assisted it massively.
And we have on screen now is of apparently deleted tweets from Mr. Urban related to the death of James Le Mesurier. Now, James Le Mesurier was the founder of the aforementioned White Helmet organization in Syria, which is now being promoted as Syria's new emergency service by the same people who backed it in the first place. Le Mesurier was also, we've discussed him before, deployed to Kosovo back in the day, a very shady, clear MI6 connected man. Urban puts out this tweet from just after Le Mesurier died, saying, I don't know whether he was in MI6. I don't think I ever met him. Which means, according to my interpretation, Le Mesurier was definitely in MI6 and Urban definitely knew him very well. And the fact that he had to put out this sort of panicked tweet and then deleted it tells us that somebody got on the phone and says, Mark, you just made yourself look incredibly guilty. Stop it. There is, of course, the ongoing debate as to, well, how did Le Mesurier die? I'm not aware that the Turkish police ever reached any kind of clear conclusions on that. But, Kit, what's your take on Mark Urban's association with James Le Mesurier? And do you agree with me that it is clear that he had an association and that's why he felt the need to put out this sort of preemptive denial?
Well, absolutely. And I think that what's quite interesting is I was actually at the time that Le Mesurier died in extremely strange circumstances, falling from a window of his lavish Istanbul property paid for by the British state. It came as a shock because I was actually investigating him and Mayday Rescue, the kind of British intelligence front company that ran the White Helmets at the time, and had had several conversations with people who worked there, which typically consisted of them swearing at me and telling me that I didn't know who I was messing with. So it kind of came as a bolt out of the blue that he died, right in the middle of my research into this. But Urban's tweets came to my attention. I very quickly screen grabbed them because I thought that there was a high chance that he might retract them because the information he was providing was so incendiary. He explicitly states that. He kind of blamed, by implication, Russia by claiming that Le Mesurier had been subject to an extensive black propaganda campaign by Russian and Assad media and their acolytes. And he also stated that a former colleague, whether that's of Le Mesurier or Urban or both, isn't clear, told him, to which they told Mark Urban, "I know the flat well, and it's not possible to fall," inverted commas, "from that balcony." And they strongly suspected foul play. Now, what was interesting is Urban was not the only figure to, in the immediate aftermath of the Mesurier's death, blame Russia. And then quickly reverse ferret and delete all of his posts on the matter and say, actually, despite everything I just said about how it's impossible to fall from the balcony, he actually probably did kill himself. And I find that very, very interesting because then as now, blaming Russia for everything and anything, including quite literally bad weather, was a very safe thing to do. There was zero risk attached to attributing any incident, any event to Russia, to Muscovite agents of influence, to, yes, quote unquote disinformation. But he felt the need to not only retract this, but then very quickly start pushing the line that Le Mesurier committed suicide. And I actually said to, it's funny that you say that someone got on phone. I said to him at the time, did your mate Pablo give you a ring and ask what the hell you were doing? To which he responded, drivel. But I mean, I know for a fact that they're still in contact, but that's a discussion for another day. But the point is that we also saw this with Navalny very interestingly, where initially there was this mad dash to blame Russia for having killed him in prison and blah 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 blah, and then none other than Budanov announced that he was sorry to disappoint people, quote unquote, but we know that Navalny died from a simple blood clot. And it's again, why when you have, and the Ukrainians are blaming Russia for so much, including falsely claiming that Russia fired missiles at Poland and all sorts of which got them a harsh rebuke from the Americans. Why did they feel it necessary when there was everything to gain and nothing to lose from attributing this to Russia? Why did they feel the need to dismiss this explanation in the cases of Le Mesurier and Navalny? And as we know, Navalny was in contact with British intelligence, as he wasn't perhaps quite as formally a paid up MI6 asset as was Le Mesurier. But I mean, I do get questions do have to be asked about whether both of these people, particularly Le Mesurier, was taken out, and that this was done very abruptly and without associated briefings having been sent out in advance to people like Urban, meaning that they slipped up. Very similar to the Nord Stream 2 bombing, where there was a flurry of people cheering this, like Sikorsky, that Polish terrorist who's married to Anne Applebaum, said "Thank you USA," of course, and then deleted it. And it does tend to suggest that that they weren't given briefings in advance about this and jumped the gun and said things they shouldn't have done.
Well, I would also add that with regard to the Navalny incident, the fact that Darnov came out and said, "Oh, well, it was a simple blood clot," leads me to believe that maybe the Ukrainians killed him at the behest of maybe certain people in London, because Ukrainians are the chosen men of the and have been for quite some time, and Navalny had pretty much run out of use value shall we say, for the British. He was in prison. He was unlikely to get out. His missus had already moved on to a new pair of trousers. And was being positioned to take over as the chief dissident. Though I do notice, just an aside, they have found themselves a Russian president in exile these days. He's called Vladimir Kara-Murza. But more on him in future episodes, by the way, because he's another one who's, shall we say, a creature of British intelligence. But it was always my working assumption that Navalny was bumped off because he reached the end of his shelf life, and so it's probably the Ukrainians who did it on behalf of the British. But that's just a theory. I have no, of course, evidence to back that up. But then again, if I made a living out of making unsubstantiated, completely unevidenced claims, I myself would be a highly paid media twat. But I'd much rather serve you, good viewers and listeners, on the platforms we are on right now. But Mark Urban, of course, is one such shady bastard. But we can't go through this without mentioning another shady bastard, albeit one who is a little bit more low key, but in some respects, and that is, of course, Jeremy fucking Bowen. Now, he's very much the successor to John fucking Simpson, who is they both of them have like this demeanor of being elder statesmen who are trusted news faces. Bowen is the long time, and I mean very long time, Middle East reporter for chief of the Middle East Bureau, I think, for a long time. Going back as far as the mid-'80s, he's been reporting on Israel and Palestine for a very long time. He's been all over that. He's accused periodically by the Israelis of being anti-Semitic, and I think that in actual fact is quite deliberate because it helps lend him a bit of credibility. But he's a pure establishment hack as much as Mark Urban is. And I wanted just to mention him in passing because there's a hilarious incident of him a few years ago when he was reporting from Ukraine doing this. Now, if you can see the image there, that, of course, is Jeremy Bowen lying down on the ground in a flak jacket and helmet, pretending that he's near the site of like Russian firing and the front line. But he neglected, or his cameraman neglected to do the shot properly because there's a shot of a Ukrainian woman doing her shopping in the background. Of course, when Bowen was confronted about this, he said it was outrageous, it was lies, etc. He reacted in the same way that Mark Urban did to you. Because another thing that these people, of course, have to have is like an absurd self-regard and self-importance. I think that's more true of the BBC twats than anybody else because they do believe their own bullshit. Like Bowen probably does believe that he's an honest voice for news. And, Urban probably does believe that he's broken really important stories whilst indulging in all kinds of fakes. Here he was caught out by the foolishness of his own cameraman. But my guess is that he's been doing this for a very long time. I wanted to mention him because he's one who will be cited by average people who watch the news as being somebody who's like a little bit more fair, a little bit more credible, not as ludicrous as a De Bretton-Gordon or a Kemp, but he serves the same agenda, just does it in a slightly more subtle way. Kit, did you have anything to add on our good friend Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's interesting because, I mean, again, he is someone who's been like a made person in the media, and on top of being a long-time Middle Eastern correspondent and reporting on a number of wars, he's also bizarrely fronted documentaries about Jesus. And appeared on Have I Got News for You? So he's part of the club basically, and it's interesting that yes, that a BBC reporter would go on a quote unquote subversive satirical news show. Ample demonstration of what a pipe and slippers to the establishment Have I Got News for You actually is. In terms of actual subversive satire, I really think it's worth checking out if you're unfamiliar. The output of Chris Morris, in particular, on the Hour, which was a a parody of news. It was a radio series, which then became a TV series called The Day to Day. And both series, they frequently mock the kind of falsely dramatized reporting of people like Jeremy Bowen. On the Hour, there is an excellent skit where war breaks out, and there is a reporter who is talking about how that they are putting their lives on the line to bring you unfiltered facts from the front line in this conflict, and then you hear these explosions and gunfire getting louder and louder and louder, and they talk about how their life is at risk, and then suddenly there is this kind of warping sound, and they start complaining that oh sod it, the sound effects are broken. And it's like, it's a bit, I think it's quite similar to Bowen's kind of bombastic style of like I'm this crusading reporter, when actually he's not only not doing anything of any value, he's certainly not putting himself at any risk. He's also, like feeding into the hype and disinformation that accompanies conflicts, whether that's direct Western intervention or proxy wars. And I might add as well that he has been at the forefront of the BBC's spectacularly bad coverage of the Gaza war. The Gaza genocide, and has openly apologized for being too critical of Israel as they carry out a 21st century Holocaust. And it is because of people like him that the BBC's reporting on this has been so bad. By the same token, because people can see that this is total bullshit, he's actually doing an enormous public service with this awful coverage, because it means more and more people are turning away from the BBC. So thank you, Jeremy. That's maybe the one good thing you've done in your life.
Dreadful media twats, dreadful media twats, dreadful, dreadful, dreadful twats, terrible, dreadful media twats, dreadful, 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 dreadful twats. So it's dreadful, 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 dreadful media twats. Dreadful media twats, dreadful media twats, dreadful, dreadful media twats.